Ready? Okay, so the special topic today is about custom.
Can you take this seat and maybe get the monitor in it too?
Yeah, let's do that. Good thinking. Want to switch seats?
So the special topic today is around customer learning and our private data. So I'm going to talk about the general user testing approach that we're going to take, and then how the actual rollout's going to work. So I start with this kind of conceptual framework for the application, and this is a representation. So I kind of call this the roadmap framework because it helps paint a picture for how we can deliver value to users. And what I'm really trying to do here is, I mean, we've all worked with like analytics funnels before, and an e-commerce application is like real easy. What's the user's goal? They're going to buy something, and so you can instrument a funnel of steps they have to take to get there, and then buy something or not. So that allows you to instrument different sort of hypotheses around what's between there. In our application, it's a little bit more nebulous as far as like what is somebody trying to buy or how are they getting value. So what this is a simple chart that shows the process of adding metadata to emails to create tasks in such a way that we're continually reducing signal-to-noise ratio and giving the user a context where they can optimize sort of the most valuable task they want to execute on. Today, this maps pretty well to the various panes in our application. For instance, there's this thing I call a proto-task, which is basically like, so an email can consist of many different proto-tasks. It's a nebulous, there might be something actionable in there, but you don't know until you sort of create a task out of it. And so this is the process of nebulous information going through the triage pane. The handlebar adds metadata to it, and now we have a task with a description and a sort of completion indicator. And so on down the list. So then you're on the normal pane, you can give the task a priority now. You're on the important pane, you can add resources to tasks, which is not something that's been introduced in the product yet to much depth, but you can think of like, putting like at Brian, and I need Brian to do this task, I need maybe calendar time to do this task. Well, I don't mean to dive too deep into it, but there's essential depth there. And then the today task, I feel like what's really about is getting it done, getting on your calendar for the day and finding a time slot where you're actually get something done. So this is just, I mean, these columns may change in the future, but this general framework for looking at how a non-task becomes something that's actionable and actually add value to the user is, I think, a very meaningful construct and something that we can use. So I'm going to use that today to kind of illustrate the core principles. So, so the two core principles I'm going to talk about are signal-to-noise ratio, which is the process of adding metadata to tasks to disambiguate, to let you focus on what's important. And the second thing is what I call value cost optimization, which I'll get into a little bit more. But it's basically when you're selecting how a priority is something, how urgent is it, you're picking out the most valuable task for yourself. You're saying this is what I want to get done because it's what's going to add the most value to my life. And that's how our users are going to succeed by getting choices to do those kind of things. So, so in the context of this framework, this entire process is about signal-to-noise ratio. So it's a simple concept. The more metadata that you add to an email that our application can understand or the user can understand, the less the signal-to-noise, or the higher the signal-to-noise ratio is, and that's what we want. And if I get more concrete about it, specifically mapping these notions of proto-tasks, which we're picking out of emails right now, specifically mapping it to a task list. So that is the formal definition of signal-to-noise in this context. So then there's value cost, and so now we're at a point where the user has triaged their emails on the point where they have priority and some sort of resources defined with them. Right now the resources that it takes to complete a task are sort of implicit, they're in your head. I think one of our opportunities is to add metadata in that area. So we want to give users a view of their task that they can say, this is the most valuable thing, I should be spending my time on this. And also be able to manage resource constraints at the same time. So there's sort of this, the basic version is the to-do list, right? It's like a list of tasks with a check mark on it. the extreme version of this is a probabilistic graph that basically says, based on the value and resources that you have, here's the probability that you should spend time on this at some point in the future and allocating, calendar cycles or any other resources, time, money, to get something done.
What would that look like?
Oh, a probabilistic graph?
Yeah.
Well, it would, in a visualization sense, it's kind of hard to, it might have some probability weightings, or it might be something that you press a button and it takes your to-day list and puts it on your calendar with there's a 50-50 probability that you should do this task or this task, so you might want to choose which one it is. Or it might make it a different color if our system thinks, oh, there's only a 20% chance that this is actually valuable for you to get done. Now, this is like way in the future, but it creates a conceptual ideal to kind of head towards, right? So,
I think in the perfect information scenario, it would be like there's one sticky note in the corner that says you should do this next and you should spend 23 minutes on it.
yeah.
And then you should finish it and it'll give you the next one.
Oh, yeah, no, it should.
And then you actually never even have to think about what to do next. It's just like, oh, cool.
Yeah. The limitation to doing that is the cost of inputting this metadata, and that's about it, right? I mean, there's also some limitations on computational cycles because it gets complex once you're sort of testing that many hypotheses and doing probabilistic graphs and stuff like that. But it's really a matter of can we extract that metadata from the user in a cost-efficient way?
Well, there's genuine uncertainty too, right? Like, should I do this feature or this feature? We don't know at this point which one's going to be better. But
yeah. Well, I
don't know if that's solvable. We saw that.
Sure, it's limited to the user's ability to express how valuable something is.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So then, so we get we give the user the ability to maximize their signal to noise ratio. We give them the ability to sort out what's the most valuable work that I need to get done, and then we help them get the work done. Like actually put an item on their calendar slot, or follow up with them in some way, and actually make sure that it gets done. And that's where we create user value. So going back to the sort of the shopping cart analogy, you can see how this kind of conceptual paradigm lends itself to a funnel or flow, and it's a way of evaluating different feature sets and how we're delivering value to users within that feature set. So that brings us to hypothesis testing. So at this point, I just want to say, there's different dimensions of the product that we can kind of iterate on. So there's different workflows, for instance. Horizontal workflows, that's what I'm defining as things like delegating tasks or sending out a poll. These are things that a large percentage of knowledge workers would use in one way or another. Scheduling is another one. And vertical task flows are things that are particular to a particular type of user. So in the investor case, investors review deal flow. Reviewing deal flow is a vertical workflow. And it's common to all types of investors. So CRM systems, application tracking systems, those are examples of vertical workflows. So these are different dimensions of the product that we can sort of optimize for. There's users, the type of user I'm talking about, is this a salesperson, is this an investor, is this an administrative assistant? That's one dimension. And then context, and that's what we know about the user. So that's pulling historically how have you processed your tasks and your emails in the past. It could be things like bringing geolocational data. It could be things like anything that gives us more information about what the information means to the user at the particular time they're trying to determine the value of the task or try to add metadata to it. And the final dimension that I'm presenting today anyway is metadata. And so there's different ways to input metadata into the system. Our primary mechanism today is the handlebar and on the tasker, there's various places you can add metadata in place. That's sort of the first step of what we can do in that regard, because if we're able to map structured information to particular workflows, that's another way that we can extract metadata out of unstructured emails, is to add structure. And then there's another sort of generation after that where we can do machine learning. So you can see, in all these different dimensions, there's sort of a continuum of different, how far could we go with these things and how what hypothesis or combination of things we test for hypothesis. And lastly is the presentation of metadata. You know, when you're looking at the email, when you're looking at your to-do list, how is the metadata surfaced to be very meaningful? And so these are dimensions, and this will kind of get a little bit more concrete soon. So every one of those dimensions, I get kind of a generation. So, and this is just basically an ordered queue. I'm guessing it's a little hard to read, but the particulars on there don't matter too much. So, you know, for instance, on the metadata I was just talking about, so we have metadata input. What kind of features are we using to facilitate that input? Well, I say our generation 1, if we're indexing for today, is the handlebar 2.0. That's like our next, you know, metadata. And then we have another feature called smart filters, which is like kind of an evolution of extracting metadata out of emails and so on. And so, you know, all these different dimensions basically have different, you know, continuums and generations of things that we can test, and mixing and matching these things gives us different combinations of hypotheses that we can test into the product. And so this is where we start to relate. So this is just, okay, so now that I've presented those dimensions and the set of generations that they have, it becomes a world of different hypotheses we can test. You know, if I was to say that there's 10 generations in each of those fields, you know, there's something like, you know, just under 1 million permutations of hypotheses that we could test. So, you know, we do have a job here to sort of, you know, qualitatively narrow down the set of hypotheses we want to test.
You lost me on that. How do those turn into permutations?
Oh, okay. So you have the dimensions, which are these categories right here.
Okay, so let's say one dimension is we add snooze or we don't add snooze. So like kind of like the inclusion or not of that feature. Okay.
Right. So that, like, I marked the snooze function as like a generation 1 feature in horizontal workflow. That's probably not even work-a-lots, but so we can mix and match like our current feature set with that particular feature, and then say, okay, this was how a user would complete work in this feature experiment, and here's how the user would complete work in this feature experiment with that one variable changed in that particular generation. Yeah.
But are those actually meaningful permutations to say one is just snooze, another one is, you know, snooze plus smart filters, another one is, you know, snooze without smart filters plus scheduling?
I don't think so. I think
okay.
I mean, it technically is a permutation, but it's not the most meaningful one. The meaningful one is like the right combination of these different features that we want to put together and test against one or the other. Right?
Okay.
So basically, the point is that for each one of these sort of hypotheses, that there's a representation in this format where we can say, here is what the feature looks like for the user going from an unstructured email into getting their work done, and how does that compare against, you know, other feature hypotheses that we're going to test. So we come up with a methodology. So basically on the product team, it's our job to prioritize these feature experiments to say, okay, all these different dimensions, what exactly are we going to test next? And so one very concrete example of this is that, you know, the dimension of user type. We want to focus on one particular user type for the product data, and that very likely to be an investor at the moment. And so we're going to limit the set of horizontal workflows instead of vertical workflows that we would test all of in the permutations to that particular use case. So we're constraining the problem to a particular set of users, and then from there we'll probably constrain it even more and say, yeah, we just want to test in these kind of dimensions. And so that gives us a concrete plan of the set of funnels that we can sort of qualitatively and quantitatively instrument as we are, like, you know, evaluating for learning about our users. So first is prioritization, and then define the feature experiment. So every sort of permutation will have a set of mock-ups that say, like, okay, from start to finish, this is how the user gets value out of this particular feature set. Then we'll test the feature qualitatively, validate, and then we'll test the feature quantitatively and validate, and repeat as necessary. So going back to the sort of the beta release that we're talking about, this is exactly what we're going to do. We're going to hone down on the feature sets that relate to investors. We're going to create mock-ups for the exact workflows that we're trying to enable in those users. And then we're going to test it internally qualitatively and say, okay, does this thing actually accomplish the goal and provide user to the value to these particular users? And when we think so, then we go outside the building and we do the same qualitative test and validate it with those particular users. And if we've sort of confirmed our qualitative assumptions that this is adding value, then we actually get to the point where people use the product and we can start collecting quantitative data. And then we can start setting up all kinds of funnels, to statistically see like how does this feature experiment compare with this feature experiment along the lines of the instrumentation that we've been talking about. So this is the plan. So here's one example.
And how do you make sure you don't get steered incorrectly by the qualitative? Like, sometimes people will be like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
I like that, or I don't like that, but then you have a different answer whether you're actually using it or not when it's in your hands.
Well, I think it's a combination of good taste, just being very detail oriented and getting a little bit lucky, but also continually going through that cycle and always qualitatively determining whether this particular feature experiment is going to have
Still the
value.
final gate,
Yeah.
just to get there. Okay.
And I think that's where we're going to be actually. Like once we get our tickets finished on the private data, we'll be in the cycle where we'll be like, okay, these are the users and this is how we want to deliver value. And we realize, there's a lot of different cycles of this that we have to sort of complete and add a feature or two every day, or maybe 5 to 10 features every day or whatever it takes, until we actually accomplish that. And we say, oh yeah, an investor would pick this up, they could review a deal flow, they could schedule with the candidate, and then they could complete this and get value out of our product and demonstrate that directly to them. So here's one example. So right now I have GitHub set up where it emails me on every commit. So I get a bunch of these emails right here. It's one of my horizontal workflows, or it's actually one of my vertical workflows that I do code reviews, right? So I have dozens of these things in my inbox every day, and so my flow right now is to go email by email by email. So we've got going back to my language, a prototask here, or maybe multiple prototasks, and I've got to add metadata to it to create a task and say like do a code review on this, and then go through the actions of completing it. Now, one feature that I've been that's on the roadmap is called presentation templates, and it allows you to take multiple emails and kind of like display a bulk view, and then even pull in data from widgets here. So what you're seeing here is those same 15 emails, although it's only 7, pulled up in a view that's much easier for me. So what happened here was that hypothetically we coded up a workflow in the system that said this is what a code review is, and in pattern match on the particular, say, subject line or maybe a URL, and so it was able to relate those emails to a particular workflow, and then take that metadata and present the information to me in context so that I can get this work done right here. So we've gone from having a whole bunch of unstructured emails to an email that hits on this, where in this case we've actually already added all this metadata to it, and in fact put it on the calendar slot because like I'm triaging email right now, so it's now, and it made it actionable. So here's 2 different feature experiments. This is the baseline, this is the experiment, and how does the user get value out of it? We can trace exactly how the metadata was sort of added to these emails, and sort of how efficient it was and how quick was it until the user got value. So in this case, these are actually tasks right here. So I get this email and I can say, yeah, I want to review this. I hit the little GitHub button and it pulls up this widget which actually just pulls the page in, or some presentation of the page. And I can see the information that I need right there. Check off the task and I'm done. I've gotten value out of the tool in much less steps of adding metadata. I've reduced the signal to noise ratio, and that's what's important. So this is one dimension. So this is an example on this sort of permutation set here where I took what I would call a 3rd generation presentation of metadata combined with 1st generation of other tools, and that was one feature set. So we can label the feature experiment in our system as such and just continue testing. So that's the vision here, is that we can use this sort of conceptual framework, and it's of course a work in progress. You know, there's a lot of things about this that will change, but I think the idea of concretely defining who our users are and how exactly those get value, and then testing those against other hypotheses is key, and will add a lot of value. And so you can kind of see how, like, in the InView dashboard version, we would just sort of be picking off different permutations here, testing those, rolling them out to a particular set of users, and doing that over and over again until we've ironed out all the horizontal workflows and all the vertical workflows that we think are sufficient for sort of a launch. And then we'll have you know, different sets of users that we know will get value out of our product, and that's what we're trying to do here. So.
And any more thoughts on like the signal to noise and cost to value? Do you think there's a specific quantitative metric that would measure those?
Well, I think it's unrealistic to think that we can measure all these things quantitatively, especially right off the bat. So there's definitely a qualitative aspect of just like us personally understanding what signal to noise rate looks like in our own designs, like in the sense of simplicity and these kind of things. And then once we have enough data coming in, we can definitely make that quantitative. Like it's very, very clear how to make that quantitative.
But let's say cost to value. You can imagine, okay, you just spent 10 minutes doing code reviews, and it turns out there was another email somewhere in the inbox which was more valuable and less costly, that you finish these and then you end up getting to that later because it was such a well-integrated workflow, right? You just went, I'll just do this now.
Yeah.
So how would we capture that quantitatively eventually? Because it's almost like that's a judgment call.
Yeah, I think there's a couple different ways that we can do that. One is to ascribe, relative values to different workflows in our system. So we can say like, hey, if your code review work comes in, that falls somewhere in between, normal and important or something like that. And so then all the important tasks would take precedence over that, and maybe it would create like an action for me in the normal list to do those code reviews, and then that would pull up that template or something like that. And then, so that's one way. Another is to get smarter about the kinds of metadata that we're collecting and attributing to these tasks. There are many levels of depth that we could go to in terms of informing what the value of a decision is and what the cost of implementing a particular task is. The challenge is just like, what's the right mix of extracting metadata from the user versus the utility they get out of our application. And I think that's a little fuzzy, and I think that's just we're gonna have to use our own judgment and just kind of feel out the line a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, you could imagine project order being a signal of value.
Oh, absolutely.
If you're completing tasks on a certain project, then ranked higher, or the person who sent the task in,
Yeah, getting users to sort tasks
or
is
certain people.
Valuable collection of metadata.
Yeah.
You can definitely leverage that. So, so I feel like I just went over this slide. Maybe I put it on here twice, but this is the plan. Identify who our customer is very concretely with names and particular commonalities of jobs. So ideally that would be like 5 investors that would work with us to start with. And then prioritize the features that we think will add the most value to those users. Internal qualitative testing, that's what we've talked about. So that's going to be like the 5 people release gate thing. For Ian and Yaron, we're the beta rollout plan, where we have a qualitative gate, which is an internal team of 5 people that says this is good enough for the users that we're targeting to get value out of it, as opposed to just throwing it out to 200 users, which is kind of our initial plan. I think we just need to get more specific and concrete about what kind of value we're delivering. So we'll do the internal qualitative, external qualitative, and then external quantitative, and just repeat as necessary until we've met these thresholds and some notion of what value we're delivering. So so that pretty much wraps it up.
One more. So how about horizontal versus vertical? Specifically, the tighter the beta group is, if we get Bill Trenchard and like 4 other angel investors, they're gonna probably lead us down a very specific vertical path of,
Oh.
hey, I really need this, as opposed to like, you know.
Yeah, I think the best case is to use the horizontal workflows to accomplish a lot of the vertical workflows, right? And the horizontal workflows also appeal to a larger base of our customers, and so that's where our energy is best spent, in my mind.
Yeah.
It could be that we have a particular launch plan that revolves around, like, you know, angels virally, you know, influencing entrepreneurs or, you know, other people to use the product, right? And in that case, we may like optimize on more of a specific vertical workflow or something like that. And I think we'll find opportunities as we talk to more and more users, just like, oh, somebody really wants this vertical workflow product and it's going to add tons of value and get us tons of users, and we can make those decisions kind of like on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that actually is like, in the particular dimension of who our customer type is, I think the launch plan determines, you know, the generational structure of, like, it's very clear, like, if we need virality, then we need a set of users who are going to be viral and going to interact with one another in a way to be viral. And so, rolling that out in a very, like, meaningful way would behoove us, so that we're not just saying, oh, this is pretty, everybody should share it with one another. I mean, that's not going to happen in this application. We're going to be more deliberate about our launch.
Yeah, yeah.
I have a related question there, and feel free if that's not currently relevant to what's going on. So we want to maximize the value for the user, right? How are we trading that off with forcing the user down the linear sequence of emails latest first?
So that the generation one feature is, I mean, I don't think we are, basically, is the answer to that. That's only the feature right now. And I definitely think that there's opportunities like batch processing of emails, or other ways to just present the emails in ways that are more meaningful to the user. Things as simple as like pulling someone's image or something like that can be one step.
There is, yeah.
Yeah.
My thing is context switching is expensive.
Yeah.
And the emails are arriving in jumbled order, and the de facto way of ordering, of attacking them is in chronological order of arrival, which might not be the value order, and is not the context order.
Right.
Those are absolutely though. That's I think a very fertile ground of featured candidates,
Yeah.
right? I mean, Brian's talked about having this. You see an email, but you have like, you know, all the Facebook notifications would be like a little badge, and then different people's faces, and you'd like actually see kind of before and after in the inbox what's around it. That would be one. Another would be, you know, handle priority inbox, where we do our best based on mining historical responses what we should put first. You could imagine explicit filters where you get to pick, I want to see just this mailbox, or I want to see just people, or I want to see whatever,
Yeah,
right?
I think that makes a lot of sense to me.
But all of those, I think,
Generation
are good tests to run, because you could imagine some of those features are putting actually the burden still back on your brain to like look at stuff and filter. I mean, that's part of the current inbox, is like it's forcing you, even though maybe the screen's not that big, it's still a line. It's still forcing you to think about every one of those lines, and should I or should I not click in on that to expand it, as opposed to if we offloaded some of that into a smart filter. So one time you say, oh, Groupon, I want going into my commerce project, and then like all Groupons from that point forward go into there. You don't have that signal to noise anymore once you've made that.
Yeah, I think it would be very
Decision.
valuable.
Yeah.
And I think there's also backed up by some cognitive research that the more you can do things on autopilot, the easier. But if you have random order of emails, there's nothing on autopilot. It's full cognitive action and very tiring, and people avoid it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Do that.
And so,
I had a question on, so like we sort of pick who our target beta users are, and it seems like you guys have a pretty good understanding of what their day looks like, but I don't. I've never sat and watched like an investor work, so I'm wondering, like, to the extent that I'm, trying to make smart